Welcome back, everyone, to Ruminations podcast, discussing topics of interest, intrigue, and mystery, all on the journey to authentic story making. I'm glad you're here. So today, kind of a little bit more informal. I have notes written down. So if I'm not always talking with eye contact, you will forgive me, because I'm not making speeches. I am just letting my thoughts go out and reading notes. A lot of times I don't have a whole lot of time that I've prepared for these podcasts, but I just want to be able to get them out. And that's the whole point of Ruminations, is you're kind of thinking over things, thinking out loud and whatnot. So I want to talk today mainly on the powers of fiction, or the powers that are found in story. I want to talk about what reading or even writing a good story will do within us. There's a lot of amazing, powerful things that can be accomplished through this avenue, through this art. So jumping right into it, what reading good fiction can do is create a sense of what Lewis and Tolkien called recovery. It is an appreciation, regaining an appreciation for the glory and the beauty of creation around us. So in this book I've talked about before, Christian Mythmakers, by Roland Hine, he has a section on J.R. Tolkien, and I'm just going to read it for you. So Tolkien felt that one must look beyond the everyday sameness and discover new perspectives from which the familiar look odd. When we experience the pleasant shock of entering a plausible fantasy world, we briefly escape from the dehumanizing and degrading aspects of our mechanized and now computerized society. This effect, which Tolkien calls recovery, is positive and exhilarating. And then he kind of describes what he means by recovery. He says, we recover a sense of the preciousness of things. We begin to see them apart from possessiveness and self-advantage. Myth enables us to see the world with fresh attention, prompting us to cease taking things for granted and discover their full integrity. So to expound on that, it's very much like regaining the ability to see the world the way we did as children. The ability to see the world with childlike, magical eyes. And I take that line, magical eyes, from another writer within my family, my grandpa on my mom's side, who wrote a book called The Dinosaur Journal, which is a book of poetry after his son died. And he has this poem. I'm not going to read the whole poem, but just a couple stanzas that also capture this idea of how to see the world. He said, "If you look real hard with magical eyes, you can see next spring in the dying, in the falling of the leaves." That's the first stanza, and then he ends it with, "It is the children, the believers with magical eyes, who make of winter a face-flushed slide to spring, the hardest hills the best." And he was capturing within that poem something that is very true in the hearts of children. The ability to see the world with wonder and with awe and with exhilaration at the mystery and at the greatness and immensity of the world around us. And ultimately, to be able to see the Creator in what is created. And that is, and I can say this from experience, as I read good fictional stories of worlds that are, purely made up, or oftentimes fictional, that are in this world, I find in the everyday that I become more conscious, more aware of just the beauty of an evening sunset as the lowering sun is hitting the trees in my front yard and the grass and the coolness of the breeze that is rolling in. It just hits me more, and I just can feel it more. And I find that I'm full of more wonder and appreciation of what God has created. And the world becomes so much more rich and deep just through that recovered awareness. So I think that's one of the very awesome benefits that come from reading a good story. Another one is reading a good story full of heroes and characters that are touching us deeply. It evokes within us the desire for virtue, for heroism, for faith, for endurance, and the list goes on. All these virtues, all these things that are given to us in the Word of God, things that we are called to be firm and fighting the good fight of faith, to endure hardships with hope. All these things, when I read a good story and I read a character that goes through trials, that goes through the battles, and maybe they stumble, maybe they have mistakes and failures, but they recover and they stand faithful and loyal and all these things. To the reader, it just gives us the desire to also follow in their steps, to be faithful, to be loyal. And on the flip side, we desire to be like the heroes in a good tale. Whether it's a movie or a book, when we see that character that to us is just heroic and amazing and awesome, but also flawed and full of weaknesses that are overcome through the events of the tale, we aspire to do the same. And on the flip side, we can see clear pictures of the things we do not want to become. Not so much the failures and mistakes, but the hard-heartedness that can come through that in certain characters, or the refusal to let those mistakes change us for the better, and those characters that wallow in them, and they so just as an example, Denethor in Lord of the Rings, once a mighty man, once a man, a great leader, a character who is strong, and but they despair, and he despairs, and he never recovers in the end. Whereas Theoden, who is also a great leader of men and has his moment of fallenness and despair, but he recovers. And the contrast of those two characters is the same contrast as what I'm getting at here, where we aspire to be like the one who came through, the one who overcame, and we are filled with dread to ever allow ourselves to be like those characters that never did recover, who sunk into their despondency and failure and unrepentance and all these things. And even just, that's a character that it wasn't even an evil character, but there are the evil characters as well that give us these clear pictures of what can be the result of fallenness and things that we do not want to become ourselves. So they're very unlovely vices that come through these characters. There's envy, greed, lust, all these things that are painted clearly in the story, in the context, to where just as the desire for virtue was built in us through reading about good characters, the abhorrence of vices is also deposited within our hearts as well. Again, the power of a good story. A lot of these things within Christianity that we boil down to do's and don'ts. And a lot of times it's hard for people to respond to simply do this, don't do this, be this way, don't be this way. But when we see it in action in these characters, it gives us the desire, one way or the other, to not do the evil, but to do the good, to strive for the good, and to shun these vices. So again, creating a sense of recovery, giving us the desire for virtue and the abhorrence of vices. Next, it reminds us that evil can be defeated through the small acts of ordinary characters. One of my favorite parts of a story, and it was conveyed very well, and it came out in a line of Gandalf in the recent Hobbit trilogy movies. The simple acts of ordinary people, those who do not give in, even to the smallest daily acts that seem to have such little consequence. It's those kind of characters and those kind of choices that end up moving the entirety of the story and having so much power in the end of these inconsequential, ordinary, but good acts. It reminds us that evil can be defeated. And yes, evil, a good story will always have the enemy and the evil at times seem unbeatable and just too much to overcome. But they are overcome in the end. And it's oftentimes in the best stories through the weak but simple, ordinary characters who remain faithful. A good story will also remind us that everything spoken by God, the Creator, the Author, will come to pass no matter how dark things get. To be able to see promises conveyed in a story, oftentimes at the beginning of a story, sometimes through the avenue of like a prophecy or something, which I'm going to be talking about in a minute, and then seeing through the events of the story how impossible it could ever be for that to come about. Those good promises, those happy endings. But in the end, they do. Darkness is defeated, and the good wins out, and what was spoken, the truth, will come to pass. Seeing those played out in a story help root it in the reader's hearts, and I'm speaking again from experience. To read about these things and seeing the impossibilities and the eucatastrophes, the turnarounds from just total destruction and loss to victory. We know it to be true that is what it will be of our own story, because we have the Bible, we have the end of our story already written. But sometimes reading it in fiction helps root it down and actually will make us be able to hold on to the hope even better. Something about reading fiction gets that down inside of us all the more. Last thing I want to touch on about the power of story is that it consoles us with the sure hope of that happy ending, that eternal reward. So, I just finished a book. I didn't grab it, so I can't show you, but the title is The Crown of Eden, and is a part of a duology that is the Seven Kingdoms Chronicles, written by Thomas Williams. I just read it for the second time. I read it years ago. And so it started out with this prophecy. And to me, as a reader, I like to have prophecy in a book done right. But to me, at first, this one was like written in such a way that to me it was so obvious as to what it was prophesying, but it was meant to be kind of this cryptic prophecy, which is okay. I prefer a prophecy to be a little bit less obvious, because in the end we can't know what a prophecy, exactly how it will be fulfilled, until we see it happen. And when it happens, it clicks perfectly into place and it becomes clear. But all that aside, there's this prophecy at the beginning of the book, and it's, as every good prophecy, speaking of a future hope, a victory that is to come. And throughout the whole course of this book, it was getting clearer and clearer that this spoken hope, this prophecy, was not going to come to pass. It was becoming more and more impossible. And there was very few characters that kept faith that it was going to come to pass. And of course it does at the end. And it was one of these books that reminded me of the glory of a happy ending book. There's a lot of different ways to end books that are good. There's the cliffhangers. There is, just the simple back to normal kind of endings. But there's the ending that is just that so happy. Everything that seemed impossible all comes together in this moment, this U-turn, this catastrophe. Everything comes back to just a glorious ending, because it's really like the beginning of the rest of the story of these characters' lives. But it just reminded me of just that awesome element of having that such a happy ending. All these characters that have been going through so many trials and all their own adventures, and they all come together at the end, and it's just all the wrongs are righted, and the dreams that were impossible are fulfilled. All these things. And it's so powerful because as a Christian, as a believer, we know that our ending, which really isn't an ending, is going to be much like that, but even infinitely greater. But having it conveyed in a book that well is just highlighting, again, what the true power of having a good story can do. It fills us with hope. It reminds us of truth. It helps us to aspire and desire the virtues and to shun the vices. It recovers the sense of awe and wonder for the world around us and the Creator who created it. So I think that's going to be the ramblings for today, the ruminations. I just wanted to get something out this week. I've been writing a little bit, not as much as I wanted to, but got a lot going on. Yeah, I'm glad you guys joined me today. And if you guys have any elements of that you've noticed reading good stories that jump out to you, that is like, this is a purpose, a true good purpose of fiction. Comment below if it was something that I didn't cover. Otherwise, we'll see you on the next one. Thanks for tuning in. I'm out.